From the Korean Zombie's tough KO loss to Yair Rodriguez, to Daniel Cormier crying his heart out after losing to John Jones, these are the most heartbreaking UFC moments. When you're up against Yair, you never know what can happen next. And the Korean Zombie knows that better than anyone else. When both men faced off in November of 2018, everyone knew the fight was going to be an absolute banger. Even though Rodriguez tried his best to defeat the Korean Zombie, it was clear all fight long that the Mexican just wasn't on his level. In fact, heading into the 5th round, 2 judges had the Korean Zombie winning the fight 39-37, while the 3rd one had it scored 38-38. He was on his way to winning the 5th round as well. But then we were treated to one of the craziest KOs in the history of the sport. With around 13 seconds left, Yair challenged TKZ to stand up, and then these two just went at it. But unfortunately for the Korean Zombie, their exchange ended in a last-second KO. Just like that, he went from almost winning 3 fights in a row against the best contenders at featherweight to being on the wrong side of history. Speaking of being on the wrong side of history, who can forget Alexander Volkanovski's heartbreaking loss to Islam Makhachev? After almost defeating the lightweight champ at UFC 284, fans were dying to see the great face-off against Islam once again. But with there being so many deserving contenders at 155, we thought we'd have to wait a long time before seeing them face off once more. After all, with Charles Oliveira dominating at UFC 289, he was given another chance against Makhachev. And since Justin Gaethje won against Dustin Poirier at UFC 291, it was obvious that he was going to get a shot at the title too. Keeping all of this in mind, we thought Islam vs. Volk 2 would happen in 2024. But then, 12 days before Makhachev was set to face off against Charles, the Brazilian pulled out because of an injury. The UFC asked Alex to be the replacement fighter, and he happily accepted on just 12 days' notice. Everyone went wild when they heard of the announcement, with some expecting the Great to get the job done this time around. But instead, Islam annihilated him. Within just 2 minutes, the lightweight champ caught Volkanovski with a head kick that sent the Aussie crashing down. Just like that, the Great's dreams of becoming a double champ were shattered. Not only was he heartbroken, but all of his fans around the world were. And he's not the only Aussie whose dreams were shattered in 2023. Yep, I'm talking about Robert Whittaker's tough loss to Dricus du Plessis. For years, Bobby Knuckles has been hailed as the best middleweight in the UFC not named Israel Adesanya, because he'd dominate everyone except Stylebender. So when the UFC announced that the Reaper would be facing off against Dricus at UFC 290, with the winner getting a shot at the 185-pound title, fans believed Rob was going to get another chance to be the king of his division. Before their bout, still Knox wasn't seen as the best fighter, especially because his performance at UFC 285 wasn't particularly impressive. 99% of the MMA world had Whittaker taking the W because they thought he was leagues ahead of DDP. But once they stepped into the octagon, Dricus pulled off one of the craziest upsets of all time. Not only did he win against the Reaper, but he mauled the hell out of him, leaving Whittaker's fans heartbroken. Much like Alex, Bobby Knuckles went from closing in on something special to getting KO'd. Though if we're talking about heartbreaking losses in the middleweight division, I need to mention the Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman saga. The Spider's easily one of the greatest mixed martial artists ever, as he had a 17-fight win streak and the longest title reign in UFC history at 2,457 days. Then things took a turn for the worse in July of 2013. Silva was up against Chris at UFC 162, and the Brazilian was expected to cruise to victory. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. For some reason, Anderson chose to get super cocky and started leaving his face wide open for Weidman to attack, and after dodging a few punches, Silva finally got caught with one, resulting in his legendary run coming to an end. They had their rematch at UFC 168. But this time, the ending was even worse for the Spider, as he snapped his leg, resulting in another loss. He was never the same fighter again, and it was rough seeing him go from hero to zero. Another all-time great who suffered a heartbreaking loss is Jose Aldo. Besides Volk, Aldo's the greatest featherweight of all time. I mean, this man went undefeated for over a decade, winning 18 straight fights, which included numerous title defenses. But his dominance was put to a halt at UFC 194. After looking unbeatable for so long, Conor McGregor just came in and KO'd Aldo within 13 seconds. Mystic Mac talked so much trash in the build-up to the fight that some people wanted Jose to let his fighting do the talking, but instead, he was humiliated by McGregor. So no matter how great Aldo's career was, it'll always be undermined by his heartbreaking loss to Conor. But hey, at least Jose won the title back after being KO'd like that. Cause after Gaethje KO'd Dustin Poirier, his chances of winning the lightweight title are at 0. When both men fought in 2018, fans were treated to an absolute slobber knocker, which saw the Diamond come out on top. So when Dana announced that they'd have a rematch at UFC 291 with the BMF title, as well as a shot at the 155-pound belt on the line, fans went wild. Dustin's been a legit contender at lightweight for years, but he kept coming up short when the championship was on the line. Though a win against Gaethje would have put him right back in the title picture. That said, a loss would mean that he'd never have another chance. After an exciting first round, Justin unleashed a brutal head kick that sent Poirier into the Shadow Realm, and now the Diamond has no chance of even fighting for the lightweight title, let alone winning it. The same goes for Kamaru Usman and the welterweight title, and it's all cause of that devastating head kick from Leon Edwards. After GSP, Usman is the greatest welterweight of all time. I mean, his run from 2015 to 2022 was nothing short of phenomenal. The Nigerian Nightmare was unbeatable and was a super active champ. When Usman found himself up against an old foe in Leon at UFC 278, he was piecing up the Brit as everyone expected. Edwards had no chance of winning the fight, but then with just a minute left, Rocky landed a clean head kick that sent Usman into another dimension. And just like that, the most dominant welterweight run of the modern era came to an end, even though Usman had the fight in the bag before the KO. Since then, Kamaru's lost 2 more fights, and he's no longer the pound-for-pound king. It was a heartbreaking loss, no doubt, but Dustin's loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov was even worse. This was the Diamond's first chance at winning the 155-pound belt. And when I say he was on the verge of beating one of the legends of the sport, I'm not kidding. Khabib was fresh off his epic win against Conor, while DP had won the interim title against Holloway, so we knew it was going to be a banger. And in round 3, Poirier almost pulled off the impossible, making Khabib tap. With a little under 4.5 minutes left in the third round, Nurmagomedov shot for the takedown, and within a few seconds, Dustin had the guillotine locked in. It looked like it was all over for the lightweight GOAT, but Khabib somehow managed to escape it, and then locked in a rear naked choke on Dustin, who had no choice but to tap out. It was a heartbreaking loss for the Diamond as he was so close, yet so far. And that's why he couldn't stop crying in the post-fight presser. That's a feeling Daniel Cormier knows quite well because he felt just as terrible after losing to Jon Jones in 2017. The DC versus Jones saga was one of the greatest rivalries of the sport, and after their thrilling matchup in 2015, the hype for their rematch in 2017 was through the roof. Both men hated each other like crazy, and Cormier was determined to win so that he could finally get his revenge on Jon. Not to mention, Jones's reputation had taken a massive hit thanks to his antics outside the octagon. So DC wanted to put Jones in his place. The former champ gave his all, and he was even doing pretty well, but Jon was too much for him. Bones KO'd the hell out of Cormier and made him look like a fool, so you can imagine how devastated he was. I mean, who can forget about DC being in tears while telling Joe Rogan that he was super disappointed in himself? The result was overturned to a no contest because Jones tested positive for Turinabol, and DC got to be champ again. But he had to live with the fact that he could never beat Bones. So, from Daniel Cormier crying his heart out after losing to Jon Jones, to the Korean Zombie's tough KO loss to Yair Rodriguez, those were the most heartbreaking UFC moments.